You followed a story we told you about earlier this week, a criminal case some had dubbed the Honeymoon Murder Trial. Well, today a judge in Alabama abruptly threw out the case against Gabe Watson. You see the reaction there. He was accused of murdering his new wife in order to receive thousands of dollars in insurance and death benefits. Prosecutors say they are stunned by the judge's decision. 26-year-old Tina Watson died in 2003 while scuba diving with her husband in Australia. It was on their honeymoon. They'd been married 11 days. They'd gotten married in Alabama. Gabe Watson says his wife drowned due to inexperience, yet he pleaded guilty to criminally negligent manslaughter in Australia. He served time in prison there. It's a very complicated case I want to talk about with legal analyst Sonny Hostin, a former prosecutor. It seemed the prosecution was stunned that the judge threw this out. Were you?
It's extraordinary. I was stunned because these motions for judgment of acquittal are made every single day in every criminal case across the country. They're just perfunctory.
So basically the prosecution had made its case and the judge said, you guys didn't make your case.
You didn't make your case. There just wasn't enough evidence. And what's so interesting about it, these are just never granted, Anderson, and that's because the standard is you've got to look at the evidence in the light most favorable to the government. It's a really high standard. So we hear this as prosecutors all the time, and we just figure that the defense is laying a foundation for appeal. You never hear those words, motion granted, and that's why these prosecutors are so shell-shocked.
It's so creepy in that photo of him underwater, because you see in the background his wife to the right. It's almost impossible. That shadow all the way to the right is actually his wife.
Yes.
Which is really, she ended up drowning underwater. There were allegations that he'd hugged her, that he turned off her respirator.
Right.
He had some diving experience. He'd been certified.
He was a trained rescue diver,
right,
apparently.
and that's why he pled guilty to negligent manslaughter in Australia.
That's right.
That he didn't do enough to save her.
That he didn't do enough, that he was a bad dive buddy. But I've spoken to rescue divers following this story, and they've all set the golden rule: when you see someone in trouble, you bring them to the surface. Well, he did the exact opposite in this case. He left her on the ocean floor and went up for help. That apparently was a red flag to everyone that has this type of experience. But the judge heard that kind of evidence from expert divers and still found that it just wasn't enough to prove first-degree murder.
They also hadn't really, though you don't have to prove motive in a murder case, they really hadn't done a very good job of proving motive.
That's right, and the judge really was upset about that. The judge made it very clear that the motive was ridiculous, but the prosecution doesn't have to prove motive. It's never an element of the crime. Smart prosecutors show motive because juries want that. But I think it's just extraordinary that this case never went to the jury, especially in light of the fact, as you mentioned, he pled guilty to negligence. He pled guilty. He served time.
Well, there's a big difference between negligence and murder.
Yes, that's accurate. But bottom line is, because he admitted some culpability in her death, combining that with all of the other evidence, I'm just surprised at looking at the evidence in the light most favorable to the government, this judge dismissed the case.
Interesting story.